You ever have that moment where you realize the people who are supposed to have your back picture this. I just hit the final round for a huge career milestone, the kind that could change everything for my family, and I needed a tiny favor, just a few hours of babysitting. But my parents, they looked at me like I was asking for the moon. And that's when everything shifted. Buckle up, because the story gets wild. And trust me, you won't see this coming. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mom's contact, and I felt that familiar twinge of anxiety curl in my stomach. You know that feeling you get just before you expect disappointment, that tight, acidic knot that's been with me since childhood. Yeah. But this time, I tried to tell myself it was different. This wasn't asking for some handout. This was just a simple, reciprocal family thing. I wasn't my sister, Tessa, looking for an allowance or an easy fix. I was Grace, responsible, reliable, the one who fixed things. I tapped the screen and waited. The line rang twice before her voice came through, sharp, instantly laced with suspicion, like my call automatically spelled trouble. "Grace, what's wrong?" she asked. The words clipped. I hesitated, swallowing the lump in my throat. "No, nothing's wrong," I said, forcing a steady tone. "Leo's just under the weather," I added quickly, trying to soften the blow. But then I tried to pivot, inject some light, maybe a little optimism. "Listen, I have some great news. I'm in the final round for a partnership at the firm." There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost see her shrug, her body language radiating disinterest. "That's nice, dear," she said, just like that. A verbal slap. I felt it hit me, like the floor beneath me had just shifted. Not just disinterest, but the reduction of 15 years of hard work, sleepless nights, missed dinners, late nights poring over spreadsheets, all condensed into a phrase that's nice. Dear. I forced a smile I knew she couldn't see. "That's great. Mom," I said, overcompensating with cheer, like a child trying to appear grateful for a lopsided gift. I mentioned the new patio furniture they were looking at, trying to mirror her enthusiasm, hoping maybe that connection would open the door. But it didn't. The words I was about to utter, the ask, the tiny favor hung heavily in the air. I drew a slow breath. "The interview is next Tuesday at 10 a.m. I said, "David's out of leave, and I really need to be there." I was trying to make it sound casual, manageable, like it was no big deal. Just 3 hours, that's all. Max, he'll probably just sleep. And then the silence. Oh God, the silence. Long, stretching, mocking. I could hear the faint hum of a television somewhere in the background. I pictured her standing there, leaning against the quartz countertop I had personally chosen, a look of profound inconvenience on her face, like I'd just asked for a kidney donation instead of a small favor. And then, finally, it came. Her words, so sharp, so unyielding. "Grace, you can't be serious. Your father has his golf game, and I have my book club luncheon. We're not your nannies." The words echoed through my home office, bouncing off the walls, punching through all pretense of calm. "We're not your nannies." The sting of those words didn't just hurt, they seared. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the contempt. The reduction of my career milestone into an inconvenient schedule conflict, the implication that I, their daughter, the one who had single-handedly secured their retirement, was somehow treating them like hired help. I froze, the echo of the words thrumming in my mind. Behind the shock, a slow, deliberate anger began to form. Memories flared up, sharp and exact. The late-night calls from my mom, panicked about ballooning interest on their mortgage. The spreadsheets I had built, the investments I had shifted, the personal bonus I had sacrificed to wipe that debt clean. The gleaming new sedan in their driveway, the one I had arranged through my firm because their old car was embarrassing. The allowances to Tessa, my sister, who hadn't even called them for birthdays but received a monthly stipend funded entirely by me. It all came back in a rush. A litany of sacrifices met with this disdain, this simple, icy refusal. "Grace, are you there?" my mother demanded, impatient, pulling me back from the swirl of anger and betrayal. I heard the edge in her voice, demanding, expecting me to cave. "You'll just have to reschedule your little meeting or David can handle it. That's what husbands are for." I looked at the email sitting on my desk. The final round interview, a milestone I had worked 15 years to reach, now suddenly, casually, a reschedulable coffee date. Something inside me shifted, and it wasn't panic this time. The familiar preemptive anxiety faded, replaced by a glacial, unnervingly calm focus. The same calm I usually reserved for hostile negotiations. I recognized the moment for what it was, a breach, not just of respect, but of unspoken family trust. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice steady, calm, unnervingly so. "You are not my nannies." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't enumerate my sacrifices. I hung up the phone, leaving the silence of my home pressing in. The migraine throbbed behind my eye bone, but I barely noticed. For the first time, clarity spread through me like sunlight piercing through a storm. I had been managing their lives as the dutiful, responsible daughter. But today, they had redefined the relationship. They weren't family. They were dependents who had just insulted their sole benefactor. And now, things were about to change. Sitting back in my office chair, I let the silence of the house wash over me. Leo's soft breathing came from the next room, a reminder of everything that mattered, the small life that depended on me, and the larger one I had spent 15 years building. And yet, all of that effort, all those years of late nights, sacrifices, and careful planning had been dismissed with a casual scoff. My parents didn't just refuse me, they had made it clear, in the coldest, simplest way, that they didn't see me as a daughter deserving respect. They saw me as an inconvenience, a utility, and not a valued one at that. It was infuriating, but underneath that fury, a strange clarity began to take shape. I started thinking through the timeline, the long arc of what I had done for them, the mortgage 5 years ago, when their adjustable rate loan was about to send them into foreclosure. I had spent hours poring over their finances, untangling the mess, using every bit of my bonus, every scrap of extra money to rescue them. And I hadn't just written a check, I had restructured the debt, placed the house into a family trust with myself as sole trustee, ensured they could live there rent-free, and created a monthly stipend for their expenses. I had essentially built their retirement, framed and automated, all under my name, because I had the skill and the foresight to protect them. They called me their savior, and for a moment, they had treated me like that. The daughter who cared, who planned, who fixed everything. Then there was the car. Their old sedan was fine, but it wasn't flashy. It wasn't safe by their standards. I relented and arranged a lease through my firm's corporate account luxury. Pearl white, pristine. They drove it around, basking in the envy of their retired friends, completely oblivious to the fact that the money for this and all the other indulgences came from me and Tessa, my sister, the one who had drifted through life, leaving chaos and unfinished projects in her wake. My parents had enabled her irresponsibility for years, monthly allowances, co-signed loans, devices, travel expenses, and yet, somehow, I had been portrayed as cold, unfeeling, and calculating. I had been the backbone, and they had built an entire world on top of me without checking whether the foundation was cracking. All of this ran through my mind in a rapid, clear sequence, and with each thought, my anger solidified, But it wasn't a blind, burning fury. No, it was cold, measured, and purposeful. I realized that while my parents and sister were playing a game of entitlement, I had the leverage, and for the first time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I had spent years building their comfort, their lavish, unearned security, and they had stepped over every line of gratitude and decency. It was time to reset the board, and I knew exactly how. The first step was immediate, tangible, and necessary. I couldn't rely on them, obviously. I needed Leo taken care of during my interview, and there was no way I could expose him or myself to the stress of them as sitters. My thumb hovered over my phone again, but this time with purpose. I dialed the number of a high-end childcare service, the kind reserved for executives, emergencies, and situations exactly like mine. I described the situation, the timing, the needs, and they confirmed a caregiver would arrive promptly at 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Cost eye-watering, absurd, but irrelevant. I was paying for my own peace of mind, my family's future, and the leverage I had accumulated over the years had made it possible. I confirmed everything, hung up, and let a small, satisfied smile creep across my face. Leo would be safe. My career wouldn't be interrupted. I was reclaiming control in a way my parents had never considered possible. Next came the strategic move that would ripple through everything else: the lawyer. Tom, a meticulous man, sharp and experienced, had always been a stabilizing force in moments like this. I picked up the phone and called him, my voice cool, professional, unwavering. "Hi, Tom," I said, "I need you to draw up some documents. We're making immediate changes to the Brenda and Mark family trust. As of today, I'm initiating a full review of the terms. Halt the next stipend." There was a pause, a faint click of surprise on the other end. I didn't wait for him to fill it with questions. "They need to understand," I said, almost to myself. "The rules have changed. The game is no longer in their favor." My mind went through each step, each safeguard I needed: freezing discretionary funds, tightening control over all financial disbursements, and ensuring that any future requests were routed directly through me. Every call, every document, every calculated move added to a sense of empowerment that I had never felt before. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't vengeance. This was a methodical, righteous correction of years of imbalance. As I hung up, I felt a pulse of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The weight of carrying not just my own responsibilities, but theirs as well. Lifted slightly, replaced by the sharp clarity of strategy. I knew I had built the fire that kept them warm, and now I was deciding where that warmth would go and under what conditions. It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't betrayal. It was the correction of an entitlement that had been festering for decades, a recalibration of boundaries they had systematically ignored. I allowed myself a moment to visualize the week ahead. Tuesday, the interview. My focus, absolute. The high-end caregiver, prepared, bonded, competent, ready to engage with Leo and free me to give everything to this final round. My parents, they would call, they would protest, perhaps they would try to manipulate, but none of it mattered. Every lever was in my hand, every consequence, predictable and controllable. This was the culmination of years of planning, of hard work, of discipline, and for the first time, I wasn't bending myself around their whims or their convenience. I wasn't Grace the fixer, the silent provider. I was Grace, the strategist, the executor, the one in control. And here's the weird part. As I sat there, the migraine that had throbbed behind my eye for hours barely registered. My body was tense. Yes, but my mind was sharp. The emotional storm that had threatened to pull me under was corralled and redirected. I could feel the anger. Yes, but it wasn't chaotic anymore. It was a tool, a resource, a fuel for precision. I thought about the call to Tom, the documents to be drawn, the careful planning of the childcare arrangement, and I realized that this This clarity, this control, this empowerment was exactly what I had been missing when I asked my parents for help. Theirs was the chaos, the entitled inertia. Mine was the action, the foresight, the deliberate reclaiming of agency. I reflected on my life, all the ways I had quietly, relentlessly supported them while they saw only the surface, never the work behind it. And now, in this quiet, the narrative was changing. I wasn't at their mercy. I wasn't a passive participant. I was the architect of consequences, the enforcer of rules they had ignored for far too long. And Tuesday, with the caregiver in place and the interview looming, was going to be my first demonstration of it. The leverage I had quietly accumulated over the years, the trust, the stipend, the lease, the evidence of their reliance was no longer a secret or a silent burden. It was a weapon of control, of correction, of empowerment. And I, finally, was ready to wield it. Tuesday arrived with a strange, quiet anticipation. I woke earlier than usual, almost before the sun. The house still hushed around me. Leo's fever had broken, thankfully, but he was still curled up in his bed. Toy trucks lined up like soldiers along the nightstand. David had already set out coffee and toast, that silent support I had come to rely on, and I realized in that moment how little I needed anyone else's validation when I had this, though, the life I had built. By 9:30, Mrs. Gable, the caregiver from the elite service, arrived. She was impeccably dressed, calm, professional, the kind of person who radiates competence the moment she steps into a room. Leo, sensing her presence, took to her instantly, showing off his collection, babbling happily as she knelt beside him, asking questions and listening with genuine interest. The relief that washed over me was immediate. This was exactly the moment I needed my son safe, my mind clear, the first piece of the plan falling perfectly into place. I watched them from the doorway for a heartbeat, then shut it behind me, locking in the focus I would need for the next step, reclaiming control. I sat down at my laptop, the email drafts and financial documents ready, and took a deep breath. The first action was clear, necessary, and irreversible. I opened the family trust account and initiated the freeze on the monthly stipend. My parents, long used to automatic deposits, would notice instantly. I knew exactly how it would feel for them, disorienting, frustrating, the sudden realization that the river of money they had been enjoying without thought had been dammed. But I wasn't thinking about their feelings. I was thinking about clarity, about setting boundaries that had been ignored for far too long. One click, confirmation entered, and the freeze was active. No hesitation, no second guessing. Every second I lingered would only weaken the authority I had to enforce. Then there was the car, that pearl white sedan, gleaming in the driveway, the symbol of my years of financial support and enabling their comfort. I logged into the corporate leasing portal, navigating to the manage vehicle page with practiced ease. The option to terminate the lease stared back at me. I paused only for a breath, the weight of the action settling in. Then click confirm. A pop-up appeared, warning of potential early termination fees. I ignored it. I was willing to pay the cost. And more importantly, I was ready to demonstrate control. Selecting a date for retrieval, I chose Friday, 2 days from now. Perfect timing. Of course, the day their stipend normally deposited, the day of the mother's book club luncheon. It had to be synchronized. It had to land with impact. Then I turned my attention to the forensic part of the plan. I logged into the shared credit card account, the one I had insisted my parents keep for emergencies, linked to my accounts for safety and oversight, pulling a 6-month transaction report. I scanned through the line items, cataloging each charge, each indulgence. My blood ran cold when I saw it, the $1,500 monthly transfer labeled as Tessa's rent. And not just that, extravagant dinners at expensive French restaurants, golf pro shop splurges, furniture I had never approved. Every item screamed entitlement, fraud, manipulation. And there it was, the proof. Indisputable. Ready to confront them with. I downloaded the statements, attached them to a new email addressed to Tom. Calmly, I typed, "Add this to the file. This is grounds for a formal breach of trust. I want all discretionary funds frozen effective immediately. One more thing, draft a new family agreement, terms to follow." I paused for a moment, letting the clarity of my actions settle. The cold, precise satisfaction that comes from methodical execution of long-held boundaries. This wasn't petty revenge. This was rectification. The correction of years of exploitation and entitlement. I hung up, feeling the deep, rare satisfaction of strategy finally enacted. The rest was about observing the first reactions, the ripple effects, and they came almost immediately. Within the hour, the phone rang. It was my father. His voice was high-pitched, panicked, disbelief threaded through each word. "Grace, there's a man here with a tow truck. The car, he's hooking it up. You have to call. It's a mistake." I remained seated, coffee in hand, voice even, placid as a frozen lake. "It's not a mistake, Dad," I said. "It's my asset. You've made it clear who controls the terms. The lease is terminated. The rules have changed." There was a pause, the silence screaming through the receiver, then frantic shouting from my mother, simultaneous to the muffled clatter of the tow truck's hydraulic lift. "Grace, that is our car. You can't—" I let my words drop slowly, deliberately. "It was never yours. It is my corporate asset, and you are permitted drivers. Enjoy the consequences of your entitlement." Her shrieks, my father's protests, the chaos I had anticipated, they all confirmed what I already knew. Leverage had shifted, the landscape was redefined, and in the midst of it all, I remained unnervingly calm. Each second of their panic was a beat in the rhythm I had constructed over years. I was in control, and they were learning, at long last, that I wasn't their silent provider any longer. Later that afternoon, the calls came in again, more desperate, more flustered. Emails poured into my inbox, threads filled with incredulity and thinly veiled threats. They didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. They were used to compliance, to unquestioned access to my resources. But I didn't answer. I observed. I noted. The silence of my inaction was a weapon as powerful as the financial maneuvers I had executed. And then came the first direct confrontation, a rare, necessary step to cement the boundaries I had set. My parents arrived at my door, looking for explanations, for some reversion to the old rules. But the moment they stepped into the house, the dynamic had shifted. Their faces, pale and anxious, betrayed them before a word was spoken. I led them to the living room and, without preamble, presented the documents, the statements from the credit card, the trust charter, the notes detailing the frozen stipend, and the retrieval of the corporate car. Each item I tapped with precision, letting the gravity of the evidence sink in. I watched their reactions carefully, savoring the clarity that came from finally articulating and enacting the rules they had long ignored. Shock, disbelief, indignation, these were expected, natural reactions, but they were no longer capable of altering the course. I was calm, controlled, and methodical, not cruel, but uncompromising. This was my authority, exercised for the first time in the realm that mattered most, the structure of their dependency, long maintained and now corrected, their questions, weak attempts at manipulation, faltered against the unyielding logic and the cold documentation I had prepared. Each objection was met with factual clarity, the misappropriation of funds, the misuse of the credit line, the misrepresentation of discretionary spending all laid bare. And I didn't shout, I didn't plead, I didn't allow emotion to cloud the facts. I allowed the reality of the consequences to speak for itself. The car retrieval, the frozen stipend, the documented fraud, all were the inevitable outcomes of their own behavior. I felt a sense of satisfaction. Yes, but it was not bitter. It was the satisfaction of agency reclaimed, of boundaries finally enforced. I was no longer the passive participant, the dutiful daughter absorbing entitlement. I was the architect of consequences, the enforcer of accountability, and finally, the holder of all leverage. Their shock, their attempts to plead, their frantic motions all merely reinforced the clarity of the situation. The personal stakes had been high, but the methodical approach ensured control. I had shifted from victim to strategist, from caretaker to executor, and the weight of years of unacknowledged labor began to lift, replaced with the satisfaction of power exercised rightly, with precision and without regret. It started with the routine check, the same one I had been doing for years, just scanning the transactions to make sure everything was in order. But this time, something jumped out. A transfer labeled as Tessa's rent, $1,500 every single month without fail for the past 2 years. My stomach dropped. Oh, wait, what? I double-checked the statements, scrolling through each month. There it was again and again, $36,000. My heart pounded, disbelief and shock wrestling with the simmering anger already coiled inside me. All this time, I had thought Tessa's lifestyle was mostly funded by my parents' own money, a small allowance here or there. But no, it was me. Every dollar of that $1,500 had come from me, from the trust I had set up for their benefit, the money I had painstakingly allocated, managed, and protected. And they had lied to me, lied for years, pretending this was their decision when in reality, they were redirecting my generosity to enable her irresponsibility. I felt my hands shake slightly as I grabbed my phone and my laptop, needing to confront the reality before I could even think clearly about what to do next. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to map out a strategy in my mind. This wasn't a simple confrontation. This was exposing a long-term, deliberate pattern of deception. I could feel the adrenaline pumping, but beneath it was the clarity of focus I had learned to cultivate through years of high-pressure decision-making. First, I needed the facts in front of my parents. I called them, keeping my voice calm, professional, almost eerily so. "Mom, Dad," I began, steadying myself. "I've reviewed the family trust transactions, and there are discrepancies that need to be addressed." The line went silent for a moment, and I knew the weight of those words had already begun to land. They started with protests, the usual attempts to minimize, to distract. "Oh, Grace, that must be a mistake," my mother said, her tone sharp with feigned innocence. "Tessa, that's ridiculous. We've been giving her small allowances from our own savings," my father added, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice, but I was already holding the evidence. I calmly shared my screen, walking them through the statements month by month, highlighting each $1,500 transfer. The silence on the other end was almost tangible. I could hear the disbelief, the sharp intakes of breath, the fumbling attempts at explanations that were weak and unconvincing. They had no words because there were none that could refute the numbers. I paused, letting the tension settle, watching their panic slowly bloom. "You have been diverting funds from the trust," I said, voice even but firm. "Funds intended for your living expenses, from the money I provided, to pay for Tessa's rent. That's $36,000 over 2 years. I was under the impression you were acting within the trust for yourselves. Yet all this time, you've been funneling it to her." There was a long silence, punctuated only by the faint rustle of papers on their end. And then my mother whispered, almost pleading, We we were trying to help her. She needed it. Grace, she couldn't. I cut her off. You weren't trying to help her. You were actively misrepresenting the use of funds, violating the terms of the trust, and deceiving me. This is fraud, deliberate, sustained, and undeniable. The words landed like a hammer. I could hear my father's voice falter. Grace, he stammered. No excuses, no distractions, just the cold realization. I stayed calm, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. There was no yelling, no pleading. That approach would have been futile. This was about facts, consequences, and accountability. Once the initial shock settled on them, I moved to the next stage, the confrontation with Tessa herself. I called her, and she picked up with her usual nonchalant tone, unaware of the storm about to hit. "Hi, Tessa," I said, keeping my voice light, deceptively casual. "Do you have a minute to talk about the trust?" There was a pause on her end, a flicker of unease. "What about it?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension creeping in. I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid it out, step by step. For the past 2 years, you've been receiving $1,500 a month from the trust, funds that were not authorized for your use. And without my knowledge or consent, I have the statements, the documentation, and I've already confronted our parents about this diversion. This is a serious breach of trust. Fraud, actually. And it stops now. Her reaction was instant, a mix of shock, indignation, and panic. "Wait, what?" "That's not true, Mom told me," I interrupted, holding my tone firm, neutral. "Mom didn't tell you the truth. She and Dad diverted money that was meant for their own living expenses. Funds I provided for them, directly to you, every month, $36,000 in total. Do you understand the gravity of this?" There was silence. I could almost hear her pulse quicken over the line. She tried to interrupt again, desperate to explain herself, but I pressed on. "There is no debate. You will no longer receive any funds. You need to inform them, or I will handle it legally. You will find a job or make other arrangements. The diversion of these funds stops immediately." Her voice rose, cracking with frustration. "You can't do this. Mom and Dad are—" I cut her off again, my voice flat, controlled, and unyielding. "This isn't about them. This is about you misusing funds that were never yours. You were complicit in deceiving me. That ends now. You have 24 hours to correct your living arrangements. I am done covering your irresponsibility." The words seemed to freeze the room on her end. I could hear the tension, the panic, the sudden understanding that the protective cocoon she had been living in was gone. She sputtered, trying to regain control, trying to turn the blame onto our parents, to manipulate the narrative. But I was done with manipulation and excuses. My own voice remained calm, methodical. "You've been exposed, Tessa. The fraud is documented. Every transfer, every statement, everything is in writing. I have already informed our lawyer and will take further steps if necessary. This is not negotiable." I let it hang there, silent, letting the weight of the situation sink in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The threat of the documented evidence and the consequences it carried was more powerful than any emotional appeal she could muster. She finally gasped, silence breaking, the bravado evaporating. "What? What are you going to do?" she whispered, almost unrecognizable. I was calm, almost chillingly so. "I am holding you accountable. The funds stop. You will not be able to rely on deceit or manipulation to sustain your lifestyle. You will find a way to support yourself, legally and ethically." Her voice cracked further, desperation bleeding in. But I held firm. I knew the law. I knew the leverage. And I knew that the careful documentation, the confrontation with our parents, had set the stage perfectly for this moment. Once I hung up, I let myself lean back in the chair. My hands no longer shook. My mind, once a whirlwind of shock, anger, and disbelief, was now sharp and focused. The stakes had been high. Yes, emotional, financial, relational. But the strategy had worked. I had confronted both the enablers and the beneficiary of a long-standing deception, armed with irrefutable evidence and the calm authority of someone who had spent years mastering high-stakes negotiations. The adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from clarity and the restoration of balance. I had turned the tables, not with anger alone, but with preparation, precision, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. And in that quiet aftermath, I finally felt the weight of years of frustration and betrayal begin to lift, replaced by the controlled, empowering satisfaction of being in command of my life, my family's financial reality, and the consequences of long-ignored boundaries. The day of the final confrontation arrived with an almost surreal sense of inevitability. I had meticulously planned every step, calculated every timing, every document, every piece of evidence I would need. David was at my side, silent, supportive, a calm presence to balance the electric tension humming in the air. I had rehearsed my tone, the phrasing, the order of presentation, not because I wanted theatrics, but because I knew clarity and control were paramount. There would be no chaos this time, no room for excuses or manipulation. I had built my authority, and now it was time to wield it. When the doorbell rang at exactly noon, I felt a familiar pulse of anticipation. My parents stood on the porch, their usual air of entitlement diminished, replaced by uncertainty and fear. My mother's eyes were puffy and red, her skin paler than usual. She looked as though she had aged years overnight. My father's posture, once confident, now seemed stooped and hesitant, his mouth slightly agape, as if he was expecting the ground to shift beneath him. I didn't greet them with warmth, didn't offer coffee or small talk. I led them straight to the living room, my every step deliberate, measured. David followed, placing himself strategically beside me, a silent enforcer and witness. "Come in, Toe," I said, voice calm, even. No emotion betrayed me. My mother's hand twitched, fingers twisting in her lap, the nervous energy palpable. They sat, hesitant, uncertain of what would happen next. I motioned toward the coffee table where I had laid out 3 documents in a neat, deliberate line. What is this?" my father asked. Voice trembling, unsteady, his hands gripped his knees, knuckles white. I tapped the first document. "This," I said, voice still even, controlled, conversational, "is the statement from the emergency credit card, the one I pay. Every $1,500 transfer for Tessa's rent over the last 2 years is documented here. $36,000. For those not counting, unaccounted for, diverted without my knowledge. This is fraud, material breach of trust." My mother's small, strangled sob was the only sound that followed. My father's face turned an ashen white. They were visibly reeling, the weight of reality settling in like a cold stone on their chests. I tapped the second document. "This is the original charter for the Brenda and Mark Family Trust, the one you signed. Article 4, Section B funds provided by the trust are for your sole and exclusive use and may not be transferred to a third party without the trustee's express written consent." That's me. For 24 months, you have been in material breach. The diversion of funds to Tessa was unauthorized, deceptive, and unlawful. It ends now. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive, and satisfying in a controlled, strategic way. My calm, unflinching delivery contrasted sharply with their rising panic. I let that moment stretch, giving them time to absorb the scope of their wrongdoing. Finally, I tapped the third, thick document, the one my lawyer had drafted the new family agreement. "This is your only path forward," I explained, maintaining the same composed, even tone. "The trust is dissolved. The house remains in my name. You will live here rent-free. I will pay property taxes and utilities directly. No discretionary money, no golf trips, no expensive lunches, no new grills. Under no circumstances will another cent be allocated to Tessa. You will comply, or there will be legal consequences. This is final." My parents' reaction was a mixture of shock, fear, and silent disbelief. Their shoulders slumped, their postures broken, as if the very air around them had shifted, and then, as if on cue, the door banged open. Tessa stormed in, her face red, blotchy with fury, holding her phone like a shield. "Mom, Dad, are you in there? Let me in. I know you're in there," she shrieked. David stepped slightly forward, protective, and I raised a hand, signaling him to hold. I didn't flinch. I let her enter, confident and controlled. Her fury collided with reality in a way that was almost theatrical, yet perfectly orchestrated by the groundwork I had laid. "Tessa," I said calmly, voice even and controlled, "you are right here and right now because of a 3-hour favor your mother refused to provide. You are upset. Yes, understandable, given your dependence on funds you were not entitled to. Your rent, $36,000 over 2 years, was entirely financed by funds that were never yours. The discretionary money ends. Your privileges end. Your lifestyle as funded by deception ends." Her jaw dropped, disbelief written across her face. The legal ramifications finally beginning to dawn. The drama of the moment, in public, with both parents present, was palpable. Every eye in the room saw what had been hidden for years, and the magnitude of her panic contrasted sharply with my icy calm. My mother gasped, sputtering, attempting to regain control, to shield Tessa. "Grace, she can't," but I cut her off effortlessly. "Mom, this isn't about her feelings. This isn't about excuses or emotions. This is about facts. You and Dad failed to distinguish between a gift and an entitlement. You were complicit in misusing funds. That stops today. The rules have changed." I let the words hang in the air, letting the full force of the legal and financial reality sink in. Tessa's cries escalated, now a mixture of shock, desperation, and self-preservation. "You can't do this, Mom, Dad, say something." She turned to my parents, pleading, pointing fingers, demanding intervention. But my parents sat, slack-jawed, broken, completely defeated. The facade of control they had carried for years had evaporated, leaving only the reality of accountability staring them in the face. I stayed seated, calm, measured, and unflinching, letting the weight of silence amplify the gravity of the situation. Their attempts to mediate, to plead, were futile. I moved with deliberate pace, calmly reinforcing each boundary. "Sign the agreement," I said to my parents, voice devoid of emotion, "or I will pursue eviction for breach of trust by the end of the month. This is no longer negotiable. You are no longer my parents in the traditional sense. You are tenants in my home, living under strict conditions I have set. The choice is yours." My father's hand shook violently as he reached for the pen. My mother buried her face in her hands, nodding silently. Each signature they placed was a quiet surrender, a tangible acknowledgement of the control and authority I had assumed, not through anger, but through clear, unassailable logic and preparation. David stepped forward as witness, signing the document, his presence a silent reinforcement of the boundaries I had established. I carefully collected the documents, placing them in my briefcase. "You have 1 hour to arrange for transportation," I instructed. "Then you leave. Compliance is non-negotiable." Their silence was absolute. the absence of argument, the absence of negotiation, a testament to the effectiveness of the strategy I had employed. The taxi arrived, and I watched from the window as the two people who had once held a commanding presence in my life climbed into the cab, heads bowed, their pride in ruins. The aftermath, immediate and theatrical, was just as I had anticipated. Tessa, deprived of the funds she had relied upon, crashed at a friend's apartment, flooding social media with vague, dramatic posts about betrayal and toxicity, but ultimately unable to extract any financial support. She did what she should have done 15 years ago, found employment, a hostess position at a mid-level chain restaurant, finally bearing the consequences of her own choices. My parents, for the first time in decades, lived within the rigid boundaries I had set. Book club invitations ceased, golf games vanished, discretionary spending ended. They were confined to the reality of their dependency, no longer able to manipulate or extort their way into indulgence. The silence of my house, once heavy with tension and the weight of entitlement, now rang with the clarity of resolution. I had executed the plan with precision, met every challenge with strategy and calm, and ensured that no one could manipulate, lie, or exploit the system I had built. It was not cruelty that had guided me, but the methodical restoration of fairness, boundaries, and accountability. For the first time, the balance of power, long skewed by decades of enabling, was corrected. I had remained calm, conversational, in control, and unflinching, and the results public, humiliating, and dramatic had delivered both personal and strategic vindication. In the quiet that followed, I felt the weight of years lift slightly. The emotional stakes had been sky high, the personal risks enormous, but the satisfaction of control, of justice, of setting an unambiguous precedent was profound. The house, the finances, the family dynamics, all were now defined by clarity and boundaries. The lesson was unmistakable entitlement, manipulation, and deception had consequences, and they had been administered not through rage, but through careful planning, strategic execution, and unwavering calm. And in that clarity, in that controlled unfolding of justice, I finally felt the sense of resolution I had sought for so long. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, but in its quietness, it was strikingly complete. My parents, stripped of the discretionary funds and the car, were forced into a life they hadn't had to reckon with in decades. Their routines, once full of leisurely golf games, extravagant lunches, and frivolous purchases, shrank into the narrow lanes I had set. At first, there were emails, panicked phone calls, desperate inquiries about why the money had stopped, why the car was gone, and what exactly had happened. Each one I received, I read carefully, then forwarded to Tom, my lawyer, or simply let sit in my inbox, unanswered. I didn't engage emotionally. I had no intention of being pulled back into the whirlpool of manipulation and entitlement. Every message, every call was a reinforcement of the boundaries I had so deliberately drawn. Tessa's collapse was predictable, but no less satisfying to witness from a safe distance. She had relied on the illusion of endless support for so long that when the funds were cut off, her world unraveled. Social media posts flooded with vague lamentations about betrayal, toxic energy, and the cruelty of family. I didn't respond. I didn't feel the need to. Her posts became a stark contrast to reality. Her dependency exposed, her inability to manage her own life laid bare. Eventually, as all crises do, hers reached a tipping point. She had to find a job. Desperate, she accepted a hostess position at a mid-level chain restaurant, a far cry from the lifestyle she had been living, but at least it was legal, ethical, and sustainable. That moment, watching her adjust to the consequences she had long avoided, was oddly gratifying. not from malice, but from recognition that the system of enablement and entitlement had finally been broken. She was finally accountable for herself. As for my parents, the transition was slower, filled with small, quiet moments of adjustment. They learned to live within the budget I had set. The house, once a playground for indulgence, became a structured environment, bound by strict rules and clear expectations. Book club invitations ceased, golf outings ended, and the flow of discretionary money stopped abruptly. For the first time in decades, they had to experience the reality of living within the confines of their own capabilities. The sense of humiliation was real, the shock tangible, and the realization that they were no longer in control settled over them like a weight they could not shake. But through this, I noticed something else emerging: a tentative acceptance, the beginnings of acknowledgement. Even if unspoken, they could not manipulate the system any longer, and gradually, they adjusted. Slowly, reluctantly, they learned the boundaries I had so meticulously crafted, and in this space, my own life unfolded differently than it had in years. Without the constant drain of mediating, managing, and rescuing, I found time and energy to invest in the family I had chosen and nurtured David and Leo. We spent mornings in quiet routines, afternoons in small adventures, and evenings without the looming weight of obligation to people who had repeatedly demonstrated that they would not respect it. I reveled in the peace, not in the absence of conflict for its own sake, but in the clarity of autonomy and control. I could make decisions without guilt, without fear of manipulation, without the constant, subtle erosion of my energy by their entitled expectations. There was a deep sense of vindication, too, not the petty kind, but the profound personal realization that all the years of sacrifice, strategic thinking, and diligence had not been in vain. I had finally enforced the rules, held people accountable for their actions, and reclaimed the authority and agency I had always deserved. The satisfaction of that control, of being able to look at the outcomes of my decisions and know that they were both ethical and effective, was extraordinary. Every careful step I had taken, from hiring the elite caregiver to restructuring the trust, freezing the discretionary funds, reclaiming the car, and documenting the fraud, was validated in the tangible changes in our household dynamics. I could feel the weight of years lift, replaced by the lightness that comes from clarity and resolution. With Tessa working her job, the pressure and manipulation ceased. Her frantic, entitled demands became irrelevant. She had been forced into reality, learning through experience the consequences of her previous choices, the drama, the social media posts, the pleading, all fell flat because they no longer influenced outcomes. I had insulated my immediate family from their chaos. Leo could grow in a home where his well-being was prioritized, where boundaries were respected, and where the lessons of responsibility and accountability were quietly reinforced. David and I thrived in that space. The subtle joy of watching our son play without the constant shadow of familial interference, knowing that we had secured this for him, was profound. Reflecting on the months that followed, I recognized that this was more than financial or logistical control. It was about self-definition. For so long, I had been the reliable daughter, the fixer, the silent enabler of their comfort. That role had been convenient for them, but it had cost me autonomy, peace, and clarity. By asserting my boundaries, enforcing accountability, and reclaiming control, I had redefined my relationship with my family. I was no longer a utility, no longer the quiet backstop for their failures. I had shifted from passive caretaker to active strategist, and the lessons were powerful: clarity, preparation, and calm. Deliberate action were more effective than anger or pleading. Power, when wielded ethically and deliberately, had the ability to transform lives and relationships. As weeks passed, the subtle shifts in our daily life underscored the transformation. My parents adjusted to the constraints I had imposed. Their days were quieter, less indulgent, and more measured. Tessa, for her part, began to demonstrate the faintest glimmer of responsibility, forced by circumstance rather than guidance. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake each morning with the gnawing tension of anticipating their next demand, their next manipulation. The space around me, once heavy and suffocating with obligation, now felt expansive and breathable. The financial freedom I had structured for my immediate family, the legal and practical boundaries I had established, created a foundation upon which peace, growth, and security could flourish. There was a subtle, reflective satisfaction in realizing that I had not only reclaimed my time and energy, but also imparted necessary lessons to others through action. This was not revenge, it was correction, restoration, and realignment of relationships to a functional and ethical standard. The long-term impact was evident not just in the financial adjustments, but in the behavioral shifts. My parents were learning, in their own slow, reluctant way, to exist within limits. Tessa was confronted with the reality of self-sufficiency, finally unable to manipulate or rely on deception for support, and I, freed from the invisible chains of obligation and manipulation, could engage fully with the life I had built, the career I had earned, and the immediate family I loved. On quiet Sundays, I would watch Leo play, and in those moments, the weight of the past seemed to recede. David and I would sit together, sharing a look that said everything we had weathered the storm, we had established clarity, and our home was now a place of respect, honesty, and stability. I realized that the resolution wasn't about punishment for my parents or sister. It was about reclaiming my own life, my peace, and the integrity of the family I had chosen to nurture. The boundaries I had drawn were not arbitrary. They were a necessary protection of both our well-being and our values. Reflecting on the journey, I recognized that my strength had been forged not in moments of comfort, but in years of navigating complexity, managing obligation, and silently shouldering responsibilities that were never fully acknowledged. By combining strategy, meticulous documentation, and unwavering calm, I had shifted the dynamics entirely. I had replaced chaos and entitlement with structure, fairness, and accountability. And in that shift, I found a profound personal growth, a sense of agency that permeated every aspect of my life. I was no longer just the daughter who fixed everything for everyone else. I was a strategist, a protector, and a decisive force in my own right. The final months reinforced the lessons. My parents, contained within the boundaries I had set, began to experience reality on terms they hadn't dictated. Tessa, forced to fend for herself, began understanding the weight of her choices. And I, finally, free from the constant drain of managing others' irresponsibility, thrived both professionally and personally. My career, my immediate family, and my personal peace all grew in ways that were previously impossible under the shadow of long-standing obligations. I had regained control, not through anger or emotional manipulation, but through deliberate, calculated action grounded in fact and authority. And so, in the quiet of our home, with Leo's laughter echoing through the rooms and David's steady presence beside me, I finally understood the depth of what had been achieved. Not vengeance, not triumph over others, but reclaiming my life, my boundaries, and my family's stability. The control I had exercised was both restorative and empowering, and in that calm, reflective space, I could see clearly the journey of self-reclamation and the tangible results of strategic action, preparation, and unwavering commitment to justice and integrity. The peace we had found wasn't a fleeting reprieve, it was the consequence of years of preparation, thoughtful action, and a relentless commitment to protecting the life I had built for the family I loved. In the end, reclaiming control of my life and my family's finances wasn't just about money, it was about setting boundaries, protecting my peace, and standing firm when it mattered most. It taught me the power of clarity and self-respect. If this story struck a chord with you, go ahead and give it a like. Maybe even subscribe to hear more stories of real life triumphs and lessons. Sometimes taking control is messy, but it's always worth it.